Welcome back to Star Trek Revisited, where I take a look at each episode of the original Star Trek series, TOS, and take a look at what still stands up well today, what works, what's jarring, and why these stories still matter. Today, I'm looking at a real classic, The City on the Edge of Forever. It's the second last penultimate episode in Star Trek TOS Season 1. So without any further ado, let's dive straight in. One of the first things this episode does brilliantly well is throw us straight into trouble with the Enterprise already in crisis. We're orbiting just about a planet that is mysteriously lifeless. The helm is sluggish. Systems are behaving erratically. And almost immediately we get a sense of instability and tension without bogging things down in too much exposition. It's also a lovely moment for background spotting as we can see familiar faces at their stations. Mr. Leslie at the engineering station with Scotty sat beside him. We've got Lieutenant Hadley at navigation sporting a shorter haircut than usual, I think. We see Brent walking behind Kirk's command chair and stumbling as one of the shockwaves hits the Enterprise. And we have a yeoman standing next to Kirk, one I don't believe we've seen before, but it gives the bridge that on-duty feel that TOS does so well when it wants to. Spock explains that they are passing through some areas of unusual turbulence. While he's confident that they can plot around them, the helm console suddenly explodes and Sulu is dramatically knocked to the floor injured. McCoy arrives on the bridge shortly thereafter, having been called up there by Kirk, and diagnoses a serious heart flutter. His solution is risky, a few drops of a medication called cordrazine, and Kirk is understandably hesitant. McCoy presses on anyway, and it works. And immediately he can't resist a little jibe at Kirk as he says, "You were about to make a medical comment, Jim?" And it's classic McCoy. It's brash, it's confident, it's slightly insufferable. But at the end of the day, he is right and he knows it. So with Sulu back on his feet again, Spock reports that they've plotted a course around all but one of the remaining disturbances, a critical one which happens right now. And as the ship passes through it, McCoy, distracted, still handling his hypo full of cordrazine, accidentally injects himself with the entire contents of the hypo. This is one of those moments where it might feel exaggerated on paper, but DeForest Kelley sells it completely. It's wonderfully well acted, and I love it. Almost instantly, McCoy becomes paranoid, frantic, and terrified, shouting about assassins and murderers. "I won't let you get me." He bolts from the bridge, and the teaser ends. And it's worth pausing here to appreciate how efficiently this story sets itself up. No long mystery, no slow burn. One mistake, one chemical, one irrational act, and the entire episode is set up and we're good to go. After the opening titles have completed, we get the episode name, The City on the Edge of Forever, and we can see a security search is underway on the Enterprise to try and locate the dangerously ill McCoy. We see Lieutenant Galloway, another familiar background face who we've not seen in some time, not since, I think, Miri, potentially, so it's quite nice to see him again. Now, as they're searching, McCoy manages to evade this ship-wide search, as is often the case in these situations, and he manages to ambush and knock out Transporter Chief Kyle, yet another familiar face. So we're getting all of the hits here in terms of the background actors. Everyone is here. But he knocks out Kyle, and then he manages to transport himself down to the planet. Spock identifies the location to which McCoy is beamed as specifically to the focal point of the disturbances, the temporal disturbances that are happening on this planet. Kirk orders a landing party to be set up to retrieve Dr. McCoy, and the landing party is composed very strangely for me. It's an unusual landing party. I mean, obviously we can't have the usual big three because McCoy's the subject of the landing party. Our focus is to find him. Our landing party consists of Kirk and Spock, which is fair enough. We've got two security guards, one of which is Galloway, and an unnamed one that I don't recognize instantly. I don't feel familiar with this security guard. And then we've got Uhura, which is unusual in and of itself. I would have expected maybe the yeoman we saw on the bridge to come down. And even more surprisingly, we've got Scotty beaming down as well, which is exceptionally unusual. They soon encounter a vast ancient structure which identifies itself as the Guardian of Forever, describing itself as both machine and being, and yet neither. The Guardian shows them images from Earth's past, revealing itself as a time portal, a gateway to other points in history. And then, as they're debating all of this, the worst happens. McCoy manages to jump through the portal during one of the historical replays that is being presented by the Guardian. Instantly, contact with the Enterprise is lost. The Guardian explains what this means. McCoy has erased the past, changed the future that they know, and only those standing near to the Guardian are somehow insulated from the effects of the time changes. Everything they know is gone. During this sequence, there's a small moment that always jars me, and there is a line where Uhura says, "Captain, I'm frightened." And I understand this is very much a product of its time in terms of how female characters are presented, but it doesn't quite sit right with me, and Uhura has faced down way worse than this without flinching, so the line feels unnecessary to me. It's a small thing, but I always notice it. With no other choice, Kirk and Spock decide they must step through the Guardian themselves into the past to try and locate McCoy and prevent him from damaging history any further and restoring things to the way they should be. They arrive in Earth's past, the early 1930s, and now immediately they look out of place in their uniforms, and particularly Spock with his eyebrows and pointed ears. There's a wonderfully comedic moment shortly thereafter their arrival where they nearly get run over crossing the street without looking, and something that echoes a scene very strongly from Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, many, many years later, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. In order to blend in, they steal some clothes that they find hanging on a fire escape, and Spock adds a hat to attempt to disguise his ears that is somewhat effective, but and oddly dignified. And while fleeing the police, who confront them on stealing said clothes, they take refuge in a basement of a building and stumble into the life of one Edith Keeler. Edith Keeler is played by the wonderful Joan Collins in a performance that's both understated and luminous is a great word to describe it. Today, she's probably best known for the American TV soap opera drama Dynasty, as we would call it in the UK, or Dynasty, as US folks would call it. But here she creates one of the most memorable guest characters ever in Star Trek. She runs the 21st Street mission, offering food and shelter and hope to those forgotten by society during this period of depression in the early 1930s. She's also a visionary, someone who believes passionately in a better future for humankind and their potential. And as we get to know her, we can't help but to admire her very, very much. She's a wonderful character played by a wonderful actress. Shortly thereafter, the episode starts to break your heart for the very first time, because using 1930s technology jury-rigged to his tricorder, Spock discovers that Edith Keeler exists at a crossroads in history. She is a focal point. She has two possible futures. In one of those possible futures, she lives and successfully influences the President of the United States to delay entering World War II, allowing Nazi Germany to win the war. In the other future, she dies in a traffic accident that very same year. And while Spock processes this with quiet logic, Kirk is gradually falling in love with Edith Keeler. I have to give a special shout out in this episode to the music, which is composed and conducted by the incredible Jerry Goldsmith. This score deserves a special mention. It's exceptional throughout. Nowhere more so than in the scene where Edith gently confronts them about being out of place. She sees straight through the surface. She knows that Spock belongs at Kirk's side, as if he's always been there and always will. And I can't help but think of that later line in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, I have been and always shall be your friend. Very similar messaging there, which Edith astutely picks up on. And as for Kirk, she senses he belongs in a different place, somewhere else, but she can't quite put her finger on it, but she's sure that she will. It's one of those rare Star Trek scenes that allows itself to breathe. Another beautiful moment is shortly afterwards where Kirk walks Edith home as Goodnight Sweetheart plays softly. He tells her a whimsical story about a novelist from a planet around the third star of Orion, gently pointing out to her in the night sky. It's a beautiful, earnest moment, but one that is ultimately and tragically doomed. McCoy eventually arrives in this time period, and the science of this is well explained earlier on, as Kirk and Spock determine that they must arrive before McCoy in this time period in order to be ready for him. Now, before he can have any impact on the future, he manages to accidentally help a man to disintegrate himself with his own phaser, a moment that we're never really allowed to dwell on, nor consider its impact into the future either. It's a very disturbing moment. Edith finds McCoy and nurses him back to health. By this point, Spock has reached the definitive conclusion Kirk is desperately trying to avoid. Edith Keeler must die. History depends on it. The final convergence comes when Edith suggests a date, a Clark Gable movie. Kirk doesn't recognize the name of Clark Gable, and she comments to Kirk that Dr. McCoy had the same reaction. Everything snaps into place, and Kirk reacts instantly. He runs, shouting for Spock. Edith wanders into the street, distracted. McCoy emerges, reunited and relieved. It's a very wonderful scene, but it doesn't get the chance to breathe because Kirk sees Edith step into the traffic. Instinctively, he moves to save her as she crosses the road and she's not paying attention, she's not looking. Spock shouts, "No, Jim!" Kirk stops, and McCoy tries instead, and Kirk stops him. Edith is tragically struck and killed by the truck. McCoy doesn't scream, but he angrily and firmly comments to Kirk, "Do you know what you just did?" And Spock replies quietly, "He knows, Doctor, he knows." His expression saying everything. With history restored, the Guardian somehow, I don't quite know how, returns Kirk, Spock and McCoy to their own time, back through the portal, back to the planet where they find the rest of the landing party exactly where they left them. Scotty remarks they were only gone for a moment. And Spock confirms that they were successful. And Kirk, emotionally wrecked, turns and says, "Let's get the hell out of here." The Enterprise is restored, and the episode ends as they beam back aboard. The episode was directed by Joseph Pevney, who we've definitely seen before. Now let's have a little bit of a comment about Harlan Ellison, who wrote this episode originally. Now his original script was far darker, involving drug dealers, crew corruption, and a disgraced Starfleet officer rather than McCoy causing the timeline shift. Gene Roddenberry and others heavily rewrote the script for budgetary and thematic and tonal reasons. Ellison absolutely despised and loathed the finished episode and publicly disowned it, even though it went on to win the Hugo Award and is almost universally praised. Ironically, one of Star Trek's finest hours is also one of its most bitterly contested behind-the-scenes stories. Okay, my final thoughts on this episode. It's often cited as the greatest Star Trek TOS episode of all time, and I completely understand why. Now, for me personally, and you'll know this about me if you've been watching along, I tend not to favour episodes rooted heavily in Earth's history or time travel. I prefer Star Trek when it's firmly in the 23rd century, among the ships, the strangeness, and the possibilities of the future. And yet, I do find it impossible not to massively admire The City on the Edge of Forever. It's bold, it's tragic, and it understands something essential, that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. For that reason, why it may not be a personal favourite of mine, it still earns a massive 9 out of 10 for me without hesitation for my IMDb score. Thank you for watching Star Trek Revisited. If you've enjoyed this reflective look back on a classic episode, please consider giving the video a like. please also consider subscribing and let me know what you think of this episode and indeed this channel and my journey to rewatch all of Star Trek in the comments. I appreciate your support. Thank you for watching. Take care, stay safe, and do travel well. Until next time, bye-bye.